Look, this has been all over the news. It's a huge, huge event. This is the hack of the Office of Personnel Management files and maybe others. You know, when it started out with it was just 4 million files. I was doing a radio interview, and this guy said, "So what you're telling me is that those 4 million files would have been more secure if they'd been in a manila folder in a desk drawer?" I said, well, yeah, they would have been a lot more secure if they had done it that way. So it's not terribly useful if you're trying to manage personnel, if that's where they all are. And you know, you need to recognize two things here, and I'll get into the actual part. Is one, with every advantage we have gained through digital means and computers and all that, we're taking some risk. It gives us great utility. They're wonderful benefits to us, but you're giving away security. And I'd love to tell you there's a real easy way to balance those two, or to have perfect security and perfect functionality. But if any of you have fiddled around with, no, you pop-ups, you got to change your password now, or you know, this needs to be updated, and you go, no, I don't have time to do that. I open the stupid computer to do work, not to update things. You realize that's not going to happen. The second part is that, you know, look, this spying is spying. You know, I was starting to get worried I was the only one saying this. Then I saw General Hayden had done a similar comment in an interview where he said, look, don't beat up the Chinese for this. The Chinese are doing what spies do. They steal things from other countries. Sometimes we steal things from other countries we're friendly with. You know, in this case, China's not a friend, so the fact that they were trying to steal information makes all the sense in the world. This is one where you have to look inwardly and, you know, within the United States and try and sort it out. So let me just back up a bit. You know, Russia and China. Russia and China, with a head nod to Mitt Romney, are our two biggest adversaries in the world. Big in size, big in populations, big in capability, and frankly, big in animus towards us. That's the reality. They've always been that, and they still are. We've added cyber to this, and frankly, China and Russia are both very, very good cyber adversaries. Russia is the best. They're a tad more sophisticated than the Chinese. They're probably as good as us, and you know, some specific programs may be better, others not so much, but they're very good. They also have the biggest darned reserve component in the world for cyber, known as the Russian organized crime world. Those guys are really, really good too. They're the ones who do most of the cyber crime in the world. They're, you know, all over the place. The Russian government protects them. As long as they don't steal money within Russia, they can steal money anywhere else in the world they want. And as long as they take taskings from the Russian government when they require them to do that. Estonia, with respect to the intel community, was not patriotic hackers. It was the Russian organized crime networks at the behest of the Russian government. Same with Georgia, the cyber component of that. Frankly, same with the two times ago in Gaza, there was a big denial of service attack against Israel as they were going in there, and the digital forensics were done. It looked exactly like the one in Estonia. You know, I don't think the Russian patriotic hackers really love Hamas that much, but they'll sure as heck work for them if they pay them. And that's kind of what goes on. So keep in mind that they are a strategic reserve for what is already the most capable cyber adversary we have. China's, as I say, a little bit behind Russia, not much, but a tad. But as I like to say, and everybody thinks I'm being a real wise guy, is there's a lot more of them. And it's not just because there's a lot more Chinese. You know, they throw more assets at problems like this. So they actually are using more heft to do that. They've also taken the technique that they've used for decades in their intel community of vacuum cleaner kind of stuff. They don't look for specific things. They steal everything, and then they sort it out when they get back home. Now they can do it digitally, much more efficiently, much greater scale, and they are. You know, they do crazy things, at least crazy in our minds. You know, how many of you have a digital picture frame in your home? You know, those little things where the pictures flip and stuff. When I was still in the government, I'd gotten a report about those, and about 2 weeks later, my wife asked me, you know, for one for Christmas. And I said, I can't get it for you. She said, why not? I said, I can't tell you, it's classified. Wives really hate that, by the way, when husbands say that sort of stuff to them. Fortunately, it's come out, so I could tell her later, and I can talk to you about it. But pretty much every digital picture frame coming into the United States is made in China. I defy you to find one that's not, whether it's from Walmart, Kmart, you know, I used to say the Sky Mall, but that went away. You know, anything, they're all made in China. And every one of them was coming into the United States with malware on it, preloaded. So when you plugged it into your computer to download your photos, you uploaded malware, and everything on your home computer started getting sent home to somewhere in China. Now, who the heck is the target of that intel operation? Americans who buy inexpensive electronics? You know, Walmart customers? It's the scale of that sort of collection is mind-boggling. And how many of us have anything worthwhile, you know, that we think on our home computer? Frankly, most of us don't. The Chinese don't care. They'll take it anyway, and they'll sort through it. And if they can find 1/100th of 1% of this mountain of data that is useful to them it was a worthwhile investment. And so the idea that they went after the OPM makes all the sense in the world. They also use criminals, though there's not quite as talented criminals in China as there are in Russia. I'll throw this out real quickly. Mr. Snowden, by the way, since this is sort of cyber-related, Mr. Snowden's thing that he never gave anything to the Chinese or the Russians, it's now quite obvious to everyone that the Russians and the Chinese have everything that Snowden took. Even though he had some of it encrypted, they've broken down the encryption. Frankly, the day he landed in Hong Kong and the day he landed wherever he did in Russia when he finally got there, within hours after his arrival, they owned everything that he had. And there's absolutely no doubt of that. Any of you who land anywhere in China, they will have everything you have as well, and you just need to understand that when you go into that country. They no longer have to get your device to get the stuff off of it. They can just take it, and they do. So Snowden, you know, wasn't real helpful there. You know, we've had there have been discoveries by the German intel community that Mr. Snowden, a lot of the stuff he released were actually fakes. Maybe we can thank Mr. Greenwald for that, but you know, there's a bunch of it that's just flat out crap. Some of it was real that he got, and now the British MI6 guys are all having to be recalled because Russia and China have all their names and where they're working. Thank you, Mr. Snowden, for protecting privacy and killing patriots. But that's another story, so I won't get too much into that. A lot of folks have said, why in the world would China want to go after OPM? It's just admin stuff. You know, it's just personnel files. Well, I don't know about you guys. I mean, you need to read different kind of spy novels because, while I like Jason Bourne, he's really cool. You really need to read, you know, about other guys. And, yeah, you know, there's a lot, if you look at really good spy novels, they usually have less shooting, less blowing up, a lot more thinking, a lot more understanding of how you use information. And the files that were in that OPM database are literally the motherlode of information for real intel organizations. How many of you have ever filled out an SF-86? All right. It is even with the new versions of it, it's still the biggest pain in the tail of anything you've ever filled out, just because who in the world remembers where you lived 20 years ago and who you can list as a reference for the time you lived in that house and in that job. I mean, it is insane, the detail in those forms. If you've never done it, and you live in Washington, eventually you probably will need to, because it's how you get a security clearance. But the detail that's there about you and your family, and then the contact information for all those references, that, you know, all the interconnectivity. And today, because we've realized that you actually get a better quality of truthfulness if you tell people, look, we're not going to screw you if you tell us you did something wrong 20 years ago. We just want to know about it, so if we know about it, nobody can use it against you. Okay, that's reasonable. So now everybody today actually puts that they really did smoke pot in college and they actually did inhale. Because you can do that as long as you list it. You had an affair, and people do that. Because usually with a lot of these things, there's polygraphs connected to them, that sort of stuff. The problem is you don't necessarily want that to be public knowledge. You know, you're okay with the government knowing it, and if it gets you your clearance, you're happy, but you kind of expected some discretion on their part with some of that information, and now that's been lost. So there's, for a really good intel organization that's trying to put together who sits where, who does what to whom, what kind of people you might have known. You know, if Ben has been to China once and has met some people in China, he's required to report that sort of stuff, right? Foreign contacts, you got to let people know. Well, those Chinese people may not have told their government that they talked to him. Well, now they know that. So there's probably some folks in China that are getting rounded up in the last few months because they didn't report contacts back here. So there's a lot of really serious stuff here that's happened. There's a potential for this to, in the long run, to be even more damaging than what Edward Snowden did, which I never thought I'd say, because Snowden, you know, I mean, he really hurt this country and our allies a lot with his revelations. But let me go back to the point. It's, even in my own organization, there was a lot of ire when this came up and said, my God, this is rank negligence and incompetence and heads need to roll. Look, OPM to some degree has my sympathy because it's really, really hard to defend a big network like that. I mean, it's almost impossible to keep out a really determined, really capable adversary like the Chinese. The way they get in is not usually really sexy, high-speed stuff. It's one of you, or me, who happens to click on the attachment on an email that looked like it was from Ben. Even has the CSP logo on the top and everything else, and it's, I mean, if you held up a real email from him and this fake one, they look exactly alike. And it's got an attachment, and you say, well, yeah, okay. I mean, that even sounds like the way Ben talks when he types. And it's really not from him, but you clicked on it, and that opens the door, and then the sophisticated stuff slithers in and starts to steal things. But my sympathy for them only goes so far. Because, frankly, if you're going to build the motherlode and centralize all of this stuff on fairly outdated legacy computers that haven't been patched recently because the company stopped making the patches for the software you're using, if you're going to put all that stuff in there, you better come up with some darn good security for it, or you are asking. This is like running a bank and putting glass windows on this vault. You know, you don't do that. You got to have the right security. So I do agree that some heads should roll. I do agree that there's some big changes that are needed. Some heads should roll just for the fact that this is not like something new. This has been going on for quite a while. And for anybody to think that determined nation-state adversaries wouldn't go after this stuff is dreaming. We go after their equivalent of it all the time. A lot of times we get it. We're not supposed to let the other guys get ours. So, you know, we got to do this better. Probably the two things to remember from this are this. one, there's a difference between the human factors and the tech factors. Americans, we really like the tech stuff, mostly because we're lazy and, you know, shiftless for the most part. And I mean everybody in America. I'm not pointing at anybody in particular. We are. We like, if we can get some gizmo, we can hook onto something so we don't have to think or do anything hard like change passwords periodically or that sort of thing. We think that's great. Except it doesn't work that way yet, folks. I worked for IBM. They spend $12 billion a year doing pure research. They're all looking for the silver bullet, the gizmo to hook on that protects us. It does not exist. It will not exist for the foreseeable future. The humans are the weak link. We've got to find a way to get us to do what's right more often than we're doing it now. You're never going to get them to stop. So keep that in mind. We got to get that part right. And then the last part is there's a lot of folks in government, some of them in this funny-shaped building that's over our heads right now, who love to say when Target gets breached or Sony gets breached or the Anthem gets breached, by God, they've failed. And they always say one of two things. Either we need to find them so extraordinarily to the point where they will finally make the investment to protect themselves, which, frankly, you can put the entire budget against that problem and you will not fix it. Or they say the federal government needs to take this over. Because, I mean, obviously the private sector can't do it. Federal government needs to deal with it. For God's sake, don't let them do that. The federal government, in this case, is not the font of innovation. They did invent the internet. DARPA did, not Al Gore. But they are so far behind in their capabilities, other than certain parts. You know, we do some things pretty good. Offensive cyber, we do very well. That's easier than defense. So the federal government needs to get off its high horse about trying to punish the people who have been victimized. I'm not saying, you know, if there's negligence, that's one thing. Just because you were breached doesn't mean there was negligence if you're a company. But the folks who think, yeah, just give it to the feds, DHS will handle it. Really? Put TSA on that mission? You know, so this is something, it's not going to go away. Will it happen again? Yes, it will. I can guarantee it. How bad will the next one be? I don't know. Hopefully we learn something from this, but there's no guarantee of that either. But this is a very significant thing. It's not just an inconvenience. There will be heads that will roll, physical ones, in some other countries because of it. But we need to protect our people who are serving our country, and we need to protect our nation's secrets for our own selfish national interests. But there isn't an easy fix or an easy solution. Anybody who says they got the answer, they're lying. All right? My old boss used to say, if it tastes that sweet, Steve, spit it out. There's something wrong with it. And that's what this is a case of. So don't look for the easy solutions. But with that, I'll stop because I'm probably over time. I didn't even look at the time. And I will take questions for a couple minutes. Take a couple of questions, and then I'll turn it over to my esteemed colleague. Yes?
I'm sorry. Let me just ask one quick question, and then I'll open it up. I guess I am today. Steve, a lot of people talk about a cyber Pearl Harbor, and there are some who've suggested that these latest incidents, in fact, constitute collectively that cyber Pearl Harbor. I guess really two parts to this question. First, is this, in fact, the cyber Pearl Harbor? And if it's not, how are we going to know when that moment has happened? What do we need to see happen to say, we've got the cyber Pearl Harbor?
I do not consider this a cyber Pearl Harbor. This was a huge, ding for us from a counter-espionage standpoint. Look, we don't go to war over spying. At least to my knowledge, we never have. I've studied this stuff. I can't find any incidents where nation states go to war over spying. We get really ticked about it. We wag our fingers at the other guys the whole time we got our hand in their pocket. It's what nation states do. It's not even illegal in international law to spy. But a cyber Pearl Harbor to me the digital thing is going to be when somebody gets hold of the industrial control systems of some of our critical infrastructure stuff and breaks things. I don't even, some people say people have to die. I don't even take it to that level, though you can bring death and destruction through cyber means now if you get hold of industrial control systems. Some people call them SCADA systems. A SCADA is actually a subset of industrial control systems. Those are the computer systems that run everything. Factories, water purification plants, chemical plants. There's some really scary scenarios that you can think of if somebody gets hold of one of those where they do that. Those are tougher hacks, though, than just going in and stealing data. So I do not consider this a cyber Pearl Harbor. I think it's going to have to do, it will be a situation where damage is done to a critical infrastructure target or goes after something in the financial sector and either, breaks down that infrastructure completely or corrupts data to a point where it causes a financial crisis. That I would consider a cyber Pearl Harbor as well.
Thank you. Dan.
I don't want to be one of these people who's recriminating as an end in itself, but it seems to me that one thing that this indicates is that we don't have an effective red team within the government that went out and preemptively played the role of the Chinese to investigate, because this was low-hanging fruit. Stuff wasn't even encrypted, as I understand it. So the question is, it's not a panacea. I'm not saying it is, but is the government moving already to make a red team? And are there bureaucratic obstacles to that? I suspect there are huge bureaucratic obstacles.
There's a lot of red teams in the government, and a lot of the organizations have their own. The military's had them for years. There's a ton of private sector companies who are available, who have all cleared personnel who could do it. It's just a matter of somebody spending the money on it and making a decision that the embarrassment that it could cause or the time it may cause to, as you go through it and people recognize it and you have to change your procedures, are worth it. The federal government immediately after this said, we're going to do a sprint towards cybersecurity. What the heck? You didn't hear the gun go off 5 or 6 years ago, 10 years ago? It's laziness. It's really hard to change. Change sucks in the mind of most Americans and definitely in the minds of most bureaucrats. And that's what it's going to take. We've got to do things differently. My favorite one is bosses. Bosses need to set the tone in all these organizations. I love doing this because it was an Air Force general, not an Army general, thank God. This guy, he was a base commander, and he made his IT people give him a one-digit password for his secure computer system because, by gosh, he was too important to be slowed down by this security junk. When the balloon goes up and the Republic is at risk, he's that needed. It wasn't even a missile base or anything. I mean, this was just total hubris on the part of this guy. I can tell you within minutes after that occurred, several things could be stated as true. One, everybody on the base knew that that's what had happened. Two, everybody on the base knew that their new boss was a complete moron. And three, everybody on the base knew that security was totally unimportant. Because if it's unimportant to the boss, it's by definition unimportant. So it's going to take leadership to do this and a lot of training. And red teaming is a great way to emphasize where those gaps remain, but it takes time and money.
Other questions? We got time for maybe two more. Kyle, and then this gentleman, and then we'll wrap it up.
I don't know if you saw the report. It was at Ars Technica. It came out yesterday, and got a lot of traffic on the internet. But it was talking about how PRC passport holders actually were involved in the contracting for the database, like some 3 years ago. And can you talk about some of that issue with using companies that have ties to China or using contractors that have business there or employees there that cause problems like this?
Yeah, number one, it's getting harder and harder to keep Chinese businesses segregated from the world because they're big, they're capable. The Canadians now shop out their phone system to Huawei. You know, their phone system's connected to our phone system. I mean, it's really difficult. You know, the main issue is cyber and cybersecurity is not something that's specific just to the security-related parts of our government. So, you know, that would never happen for DOD. They got rules against it. They check everybody. They won't, you know, let them do it. The X-Force, which was part of IBM, had a problem with that because they had folks around the world. They had non-U.S. citizens working with them that they felt they could trust, but they, you know, the military said, well, maybe you think you can trust them, but we don't. The problem is the rest of the government doesn't have those rules. And you remember the Korean virus a few years ago? I think it was like 2009. It hit the Pentagon and the White House and several non-security related departments. The White House, I remember reading a newspaper story, the White House weathered it perfectly. They didn't get in. The Pentagon just bounced off. You know, they were protected. It was like Department of Agriculture, somebody else was down for 2 weeks because of this. And they were lauding it because they said, well, gee, you know, the really important parts of our government, you know, they were protected. You know, for a guy who spent his life walking around on the ground and looking at military stuff, if part of your guys are here and part are here, that's called a gap. That's not something to applaud. That's a liability. And we have a lot of that. These systems are all interconnected in the federal government, but there are some parts of it that are really poorly defended and others that are really good. And that's a recipe for disaster.
I had a question related to, you were talking about the digital frames and hardware as almost kind of an innocent way they've done it, but what other hardware that have the Chinese got their hands on, and what kind of risk or threat is that for the future, because we don't know what they've touched, and you know, you can put a tiny little thing on a microchip.
Oh yeah, you know, the vast majority of the chips we use in America are made in China. And if you build something into a system, it's pretty much impossible to figure out it's there. I mean, there's no equivalent of like, let's sweep the room for bugs. You know, you can't wave something over your computer and decide whether it's clean or not. It just doesn't work that way. Software, you know, there are algorithms. You could look at a program package and run through, try and find some anomaly. But offensive stuff is so small compared to operating systems and defensive software that it's, you know, it's kind of like water filters. You know, water filters only stop the bugs that are big enough to get caught in a filter. If they're smaller than the filter, they go right through, like Giardia or something like that. Which, if you've ever had that, is not terribly pleasant. But it gets through most of our filters. Same thing with most of our defensive stuff. So there's a reason that we build chips in a trusted foundry here in the United States for certain parts of our federal government. They're extraordinarily expensive and, you know, almost to the point of not being a scalable kind of system. So, yeah, the hardware is, frankly, is almost always suspect. It's really suspect if it comes from Lenovo, which is a Chinese company. Used to be IBM's laptops, now it's owned by China. You know, if you're in the federal government, even if they're the lowest bidder, you probably shouldn't pick Lenovo. Or any of the other Chinese companies. But the problem is, even on good all-American companies, there's still Chinese chips. I don't have a good answer for that. We've got to find a way to, you know, like IBM does incredible, and I'm sorry to keep using IBM, but I can talk about them definitively because I work there. They spend a lot of money on protecting their supply chain. And they do it with humans, they do it with spot checks, you know, they're all over the place. It's very labor intensive, very expensive, but for them their reputation is worth the investment. Not every company is willing to do that. We need to have a way to help companies monitor that or motivate them to monitor that supply chain. It'd be real helpful. It's not there yet. And I'll think I have to stop.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you
Thanks.
again very much.